we have seen the BOJ sort of put aside its 2% inflation target given the ongoing economic pressures that the Japanese economy faces. But for how long and how much can they do when they've already implemented so many extraordinary stimulus measures?
Thank you for having me on today. The BOJ, as you pointed out, has done significant stimulus measures over the past, not just in the past year, but over the longer term. And it took extra measures once the COVID pandemic shock came out in terms of both, in addition to its normal monetary policy, also to support the corporate sector in Japan, as well as the banking sector. We do believe that if things stay in relatively bad shape, that they could do further measures. I think Governor Kuroda has already noted additional steps that the BOJ could take would be an expansion of its special lending programs, potential further cut to longer-term yield targets, and continuing to increase asset purchases, including for corporate debt and exchange-traded funds.
Relative to what the government has to do, though, how much more is needed on the fiscal side of things? Of course, the IMF has been pushing for more stimulus measures across Asia, and we're now hearing that Japan is putting together a third extra budget. Will this help?
So as you probably know, overall, Japan has taken a large, substantial fiscal measure. If you take both some of the spending measures as well as some of the other measures to support the financial sector, it amounts to close to 42% of GDP. So it's a substantial policy support package they have already put in place. We do believe the support on the fiscal side should continue for the economy until you see a substantial recovery in terms of the private sector. But gradually over time, you should shift the fiscal measures to support kind of the reallocation of workers as well as resources towards areas where there's potential for further growth.
Okay, Ranil, I want to ask you about Japan's export outlook, and I want to put it in the broader context of the IMF's concern about how weaker external demand could be bad, for example, for China, another big exporter. And it's not just China or that demand for Japan goods, U.S. good for, it's also Europe. And then we also have the fact that U.S. economy may not be moving ahead that quickly. What does it mean for Japan's pickup?
So right now we see the trends, at least for the second half of the current year, 2020, as relatively positive. You are seeing a pickup in growth, as noted in China, and at least growth forecasts for the U.S. have been revised upwards. So we do expect external demand for Japan to pick up in the second half of the year. And that is partly why we have slightly upgraded our forecast for Japan. That's one of the reasons.
Well, you know, another thing that comes out of the Outlook report for Asia is the idea that debt monetization can work, especially in countries with low inflation. Sure sounds like Japan to me. Japan's still fighting deflation. They already own 43% of the JGBs, the government bonds. Is this debt monetization, and has it worked well for Japan or not?
So a little bit here to put it in the context of the monetary policy framework that Japan has been running for some time, as you've appropriately pointed out, and over time has been adopted by more and more advanced countries. It's a form of quantitative easing, and in Japan's case, it's now they call quantitative and qualitative easing with yield curve control. That's a long term. Mm-hmm. What it's focused on is reflating the Japanese economy, and this has been taking place for some time now. In the context also of the introduction of Abenomics, the first and second arrows of that was to continue to provide accommodative monetary policy while allowing for flexible fiscal policy. So there's been a coordination between the government as well as the BOJ to ensure that the Japanese economy can be supported, including by keeping interest rates low. And in that context, the BOJ has been buying up assets, including JGB.
Another highlight of the IMF report is this concern about growing inequality in the wake of the pandemic. Services jobs destroyed. In Japan, the big story for a lot of them has been women, particularly part-time female workers in Japan. Is the government doing enough to help them in the IMF's view, in your view, Ranil? And is it something that the new Prime Minister, Mr. Suga, should be pushing harder?
So yes, you are correct, Kathleen, that at least at the beginning of the pandemic, particularly women were particularly further adversely affected. Roughly about 1 million women fell out of the labor force, probably through April 2020, for the first few months of the year. Female labor force participation since that time has partly recovered, but we think more needs to be done there to avoid the persistent gender inequality issues for a country like Japan. These are reinforcing some of the policies already in place to prevent scarring and particularly enhance female employment opportunities. So some policies that could take place are to prioritize greater training and career opportunities for women, boosting childcare and elder care. Also, things like, which have been highlighted in the context of the pandemic, incentivizing adoption of flexible work schedules, of telework, reducing overtime. And then finally, there are specific financial disincentives for second earners embedded in the tax and social security system in Japan, and those have to be adjusted.